Welcome back to State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin, and a very, very happy St. George's Day to you and your loved ones. So the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has tried to claim today that the Labour Party is the party of patriotism. Speaking at his Downing Street St. George's Day celebration, he claimed that the Reform Party are a bunch of moaners and that he's glad Labour celebrates British history. But is the Labour Party really the party of patriotism? Is it patriotic to open up our southern border to illegal crossings, removing any deterrent and letting illegal migrants run to record numbers? Is it patriotic to decriminalise illegal migration and grant the right to stay in the UK to the vast majority of people whose first act on entering our country is to break our laws? If Labour was patriotic, would it be handing over our sovereign territory to an ally of China? The Chagos Islands deal is said to be one of the most bizarre pieces of diplomacy in British history. Not only have the Chagos Islands never belonged to Mauritius in the first place, but we're also now set to pay a rumoured £18 billion for the privilege of giving away our own national territory. If the Prime Minister was patriotic, would he have administered a brutal crackdown on the Southport riots and protests, announcing much of the country, many people who were just asking questions about mass immigration, border security and integration, as the far right? Would young mothers and wives like Lucy Connolly be currently serving a 2.5-year prison sentence for what she said on social media in what was once the home of free speech? Is it patriotic to rewire our legal system around a two-tier policy that very nearly openly discriminated against a white, straight British majority while being more lenient towards minorities? A policy that was based on recommendations from none other than Labour Foreign Minister David Lammy. Is sacrificing equality before the law patriotic? Is it patriotic to stifle freedom of speech through a new definition of Islamophobia that's going to limit what we can and cannot say about the religion of Islam and its place within Western liberal democracy? Labour's adopted definition that may well end up being enshrined into UK law defines Islamophobia so widely that we shouldn't be surprised to see people getting arrested for engaging in a legitimate debate about Islamist extremism. And what about Labour's plan to drag us back into the European Union via the back door? How patriotic is that? Does that respect the vote of 17 million Brits to restore sovereignty to these islands while at the same time smashing our borders? No, I don't think the Labour Party is the party of patriotism, because a real patriotic leader is somebody who recognises a country is not really a country unless it has control of its own borders. We can only stop the migrant crisis by leaving the European Convention on Human Rights and overhauling the Human Rights Act. A true leader who understands the nation would preserve our ancient traditions of free speech and individual liberty. A patriotic leader respects his nation's sovereignty. Only when Sir Keir Starmer begins listening to the forgotten majority, the people who are fed up with this political class in Westminster, who have betrayed them time and time again on everything from mass immigration to free speech, to economic prosperity, can Keir Starmer even begin to claim to be a patriotic leader?
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private Internet Access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cyber criminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C-18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private Internet Access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GBNews discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GBnews to start protecting yourself digitally today.
Now, as always, send your own views in, but I'm joined now by former Cabinet Minister under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, Jeff Hoon. Jeff Hoon, is Keir Starmer a patriotic leader?
Yes, he is. And I think you touched on some of the aspects of his patriotism, his commitment to freedom of speech, to democracy, and above all else, to the rule of law. Those are characteristics of England, of Britain, of the United Kingdom that resound around the world, that people associate with this great country and its people. And Keir Starmer is an exemplar of those opportunities that those principles and values provide for the people of this country.
But Jeff Hoon, wherever I go in the world, Washington, Paris, Berlin, people are asking themselves the same question: what on earth is happening to the UK? And often those concerns are precisely about the erosion of free speech on these islands, from non-crime hate incidents, which, as we've seen this week, the police have admitted they don't even know if these things work, through to definitions of Islamophobia, through to an increasingly authoritarian police arriving at parents' doorsteps, arresting them because of what they've said in WhatsApp groups. I mean, the international image of the UK on these issues to do with free speech and free expression, it's not great, is it?
I don't find that when I travel. I travel very extensively, and frankly, I think you must be speaking to a very small minority of people. When I go to the United States...
Vice President J.D. Vance?
I've got lots of family in the United States, and they admire the United Kingdom's commitment to the rule of law, to freedom of speech, to our democracy. And certainly looking at the United States at the present time, that's something they admire even more than before. So I don't really accept what you're saying. All freedoms are a balance. They're a balance between the right, obviously, of people to free speech, but at the same time, those freedoms should not impact on other people. And therefore, it's a balance. And the balance is provided by our judges, by our legal system, by our commitment to the rule of law. And that's part of being patriotic in this country, because we are a country that upholds those values probably more than any other country in the world. Without being too nationalistic about it, I believe very strongly in those values, as does Keir Starmer.
When you look at the debate in this country over immigration, and you've got extensive experience in Labour governments, you were there during the era of Blair and Brown, does it not give you pause for thought when you look at the numbers of people coming into this country, when you look at the public opinion on that issue, where we've got, as YouGov showed this week, for the first time since records began, we've got basically half the country now thinking mass immigration has been bad for Britain. They've never had a number that high before. Only 19% of people think it's been mostly good for the country. Does it not worry you that actually this Labour government is fundamentally adrift from the public mood on immigration?
I don't believe that's the case at all, because whilst I share your concern about the numbers, as does the government, and the government is taking significant steps to deal with it, as all governments have done in recent years. This didn't just start less than 12 months ago with the election of a Labour government. This has been a problem for this country for very many years, particularly under the previous Conservative government. Now, I'm not making a political point when I say that. It is something that has to be tackled. And the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister, I know, have that at the top of their to-do list. And they're working very hard to deal with illegal immigration.
What is Labour's plan currently for actually fixing our borders, Jeff Hoon? Because here's my concern. Let me just lay it out for you. My concern is we're not even close to the summer months. And already this year, the numbers are up over 40% on the same time last year. They're up over 80% on the same time in 2023. My concern is this: the longer this crisis goes on, the more public trust in the system is going to collapse. And the more we're going to end up in a really quite dangerous, volatile environment where, to be frank, millions of people understandably conclude that nobody in government is in control of the borders. I mean, what is Labour's plan for actually getting their arms around this issue? Because if we don't get our arms around it as a country, I am actually really concerned about where we're going to end up.
I agree that there is a serious issue that has to be dealt with. It's not a serious issue that can just be dealt with, however, on the beaches of Kent or any other seaward-facing county in this country. It's a problem that begins thousands of miles away with gangs who are exploiting very often innocent, quite often very poor people into handing over their life savings for the prospect of coming to the United Kingdom or indeed to other European countries, because we actually at the end of a very long chain of criminal activity. And that's where the government is directing its efforts rightly, because by disrupting those criminal gangs, we will disrupt the means by which these poor people end up coming to the United Kingdom.
Well, let's see, indeed, if Labour's plan does make a difference. Thank you, Jeff Hoon, for your time this evening. Let's turn to the panel. Henry Hill from Conservative Home. Labour, is it a patriotic party?
You'd hope that all parties would be patriotic, right? It's a bit sad when everyone's trying to claim it one or the other. In Sir Keir Starmer's case, I think he is after his fashion. I think it's a sort of slightly Britpoppery sort of patriotism, which is quite soft-edged. It doesn't aim to exclude anyone. It aims to be incredibly accessible. And the problem with that, noble as the instinct is that realistically, to have a coherent identity, it needs to not only describe what unites all of its members, but it needs to describe what distinguishes them from other people, not necessarily, not in a hateful or hierarchical fashion. And so this is the problem with British values, which is that you read a list of British values, the phrase only started being used in the late 90s. And you read a list of these values and you're like, would Sir Keir Starmer expect a progressively minded Frenchman, Kazakh, not to hold any of them? Of course not. And so you end up with a definition, with a Britishness, which has no edges. Yeah. But that's the problem.
But this is the problem with the celebration of diversity more generally, isn't it? In that if you're saying that the only thing that defines a nation is that that nation welcomes diversity, it is the same thing as saying that nation has no identity of its own that you should celebrate. And when I listen to Keir Starmer talk about diversity, about how wonderful it is, I never really hear him say, what is it that is distinctive and unique about our own identity, history and culture? Because it isn't just this universal liberal theme of fairness and tolerance. That doesn't really mean anything. What is it, particularly on today, St. George's Day, what is it that makes the English distinctive? Why should we be proud of Englishness? I've never really heard Keir Starmer point to that distinctive aspect of our identity.
And I think that's one of the real failings of this project, is that actually there's nothing about English culture, prose, poetry, architecture, art, that is not accessible to people who weren't necessarily born here 5 generations ago. But you do need that foundation. And the thing about British values is it allows you to call this country an integration success story because you haven't set a test. Whereas France, with a much thicker civic nationalism, they have an integration problem, but it means that they're actually trying to turn people into a coherent idea of a Frenchman.
Benjamin Butterworth, the Labour Party now suddenly claiming it is the patriotic party for the majority, celebrating St George's Day. It doesn't really get patriotism, does it?
I think it cares a lot about looking patriotic. And I actually, I mean, I know that every Labour MP I know is very concerned about looking patriotic in these occasions. And I actually think Keir Starmer is somebody who has a better idea of Englishness than most politicians. As someone that grew up in Kent, that had working class parents, I think he's exposed to that kind of working class English tradition in a way that few politicians are. And so I think he...
Do you really believe that? The guy that
absolutely.
really was adamant that we should have a second referendum on Brexit, who really didn't understand the views and the opinions of the majority of people in this country that voted to leave the European Union, the guy that's imposed an extreme policy of mass immigration on this country. You think he understands the English working class?
Yeah, I do, because that's who he is. That's his background and that's his family.
I come from exactly that background. I do not know anybody who appears like Keir Starmer.
Well, the general election would argue differently, given lots of those areas. I mean, the swing at the election, the biggest swing was among white Brexit voters. So that suggests that they saw something in him that they related to. But aside from the sort of party political points which Jeff Hoon arguably made, I would say that we kind of exist in an era for Britain in particular, where we're not sure what our role in the world is. You know, the colonies have gone in the last century and the Queen filled that vacuum effectively, but now she's gone. And I think we do have a more broad identity crisis. And also, the question of the nation state has never been weaker, because in a globalised economy, we see it with the effect of Donald Trump on the US, on the UK in recent months, is unlike what we've been used to in decades before, the extent of the power. The way in which other countries' behaviours, like France with the migrant crisis, can affect us. I think we live in a situation where the nation state doesn't hold together like it has before, and our culture is heavily affected by other countries.
Just briefly, Henry Hill, there is a point here as to we are no longer really sure about our national story.
Sure. But part of that is because we don't teach it anymore, right? The idea that educators disparage having a canon, right? Because it's arbitrary. But the point is, if everyone knows roughly the same historical figures, dates, poets, it's a point of common ground. And the fact that we don't tell that story anymore is why nobody knows it and picks their own.
Well, indeed. Well, we'll be carrying on this debate.